What's up, everyone? It's Bryan here from the Xact IT Solutions YouTube channel where we talk about all things around cybersecurity. And today, in this video, I'm going to bring you up to speed on something that Microsoft released yesterday related to the Nobelium hacking group, which is the same hacking group that accomplished what they did with SolarWinds. They're up to new tactics, and I'm about to get into that today. But before I do, remember, I don't get paid for this channel. I don't bore you with promotions. All that I ask is that you hit that like button and you share out our videos to your people. It helps us spread the word, and it helps us spread the word about cybersecurity and what people need to do in order to protect themselves. And we're going to get into that today with this video on Nobelium and how you can protect yourself from what they're doing now. It's really interesting stuff, so let's get at it. All right, so here we go. We have Nobelium, which is notorious for being the guys behind the SolarWinds attack. And I have up on the screen a security release by Microsoft on their security blog. It was released late yesterday, May 27th, 2021. And it just goes in to say that the Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center has uncovered a wide-scale malicious email campaign operated by Nobelium, the threat actor behind the attacks against SolarWinds. Now, why this is getting interesting here, folks, is because these guys moved from SolarWinds to this new attack that they've discovered, and the problem here is that they are doing similar tactics that we saw with SolarWinds, where they go in and they test a little bit and they test a little bit more and they test a little bit more to see how far they can get this, and then once they kind of perfect their craft and how they're going to deliver the malicious payload, then they use an attack vector to deploy that at mass scale. And they did it again here. Now, SolarWinds was the attack vector when SolarWinds got hacked. That software, that's why it's called the SolarWinds hack. And this one, they're using Constant Contact. And Constant Contact is used by a heck of a lot of people. And we're going to get into what they're actually doing in this specific case, and we're going to get into what you need to do to protect yourself, because this is not going to stay in this confined area of where they're attacking right now, which is basically government related entities, think tanks, political organizations, IT services companies, and healthcare. That's really who's been targeted with this right now. But this is going to get widespread unless we get out in front of it. So this is going to be good information that they put out through Microsoft that I'm going to kind of try to summarize in this video, because I don't think most people are going to go through this whole blog post and learn not only the foundations of what this group is doing now, but what to do to protect yourself. So let's jump into it. Again, it just goes in to say who Nobelium is. I already went through that. And then they are using spear phishing campaigns to deliver Nobelium payloads. And what they like to use is Cobalt Strike and some variants of Cobalt Strike. Now, if Cobalt Strike gets on your system, basically they have complete control of it for the most part. But essentially it all revolves around a thing called an ISO file. And what an ISO file is basically it's how a computer looks at a disk. It's basically known as a disk image. And what you need to do on most systems in an ISO is mount that ISO. And once that ISO is mounted into your system, it doesn't have to be just Windows, it could be any system. It then acts like a drive that your computer can see, like a flash drive or your hard drive in your computer. And then that allows the attacker to do a lot of different things once they get you to click on something that allows this ISO to get mounted. So they have evolving delivery techniques. So this is important because sometimes they use things like an HTML file attached to a spear phishing email, and sometimes they use a link. In the very beginning, they were using a link and then that would go back to a Google app server to download the payload. And this was in the very beginning of their techniques. And as I mentioned, they have the ISO information here that they talk about, and basically how everything is deployed to your computer. The ISO image is mounted. Once that's mounted, then it gets you to try to run these DLLs, and these DLLs do different things based on what your system is. There's variants of this that go around that target specific entities, and we've seen this before with Russian and state-sponsored Russian hackers, is that they write things in their code that looks for specific things because they only want to attack specific targets. So they might not want to hit everybody or be detected or have it run on everyone's system because it could get detected. They specifically look for certain things that are earmarked that are indicative that this is that type of entity, and then they run their malicious software. If it doesn't have those things, it won't run. And then it goes on to basically say that they're looking for different things in the systems, but mainly it mentions here that we have the Cobalt Strike Beacon DLL that is encoded, and they are constantly improving from January to March how they're going to deliver this massive payload. It goes on to say here the phishing message and delivery method was not the only evolving factor in the campaign. And one of the more targeted waves, no ISO payload was delivered, but additional profiling of the target device was performed by an actor-controlled web server after the user clicked the link. Basically, all that means is that they weren't delivering that ISO to mount the drive. They were just trying to collect information about their target by sending them a link and then them clicking on it, and then they're able to collect information about their system, like if they're using a Windows device, an Apple iOS device, or an Android device, Linux, what have you, right? And then what they were doing is, if the targeted device was an Apple iOS device, the user was redirected, means taken from one site to another, to a server under the control of Nobelium, and where they exploited CVE 2021-1879, which was an iOS exploit 0-day that's since been patched. But if you happen to click on this link and your phone hadn't been updated yet, it's possible that they were able to deploy this to your iOS device. And then they moved into a more targeted delivery in April of 2021. And this is when they started using the Firebase server, which the Firebase server for Google is how they deliver the apps to Android devices. And they shifted their techniques to encode the ISO within an HTML document that was responsible for storing target host details on a remote server via the ipify.org service. And the actor sometime employed checks for specific things like an internal Active Directory domain, and then that would terminate the execution of the malicious process if it identified an unintended environment. So if it checked your system and it saw that you were part of a Windows domain and it didn't want to attack a Windows system, it wouldn't run, it would terminate. And that helps them run undetected. That's why they do these types of things, and they're employing these types of tactics in their attack software because they only want it to run on the devices that they know that they can exploit. So then in May of this year, the actor changed techniques once more by maintaining the HTML, which is basically a web page that gets sent to you in an email, and the ISO combination. But then it dropped a custom .NET. .NET is a programming language by Microsoft, and that they dropped that .NET implant, and that's been detected now as a virus called Boombox, and then that reported to host-based reconnaissance data to download additional payloads, which are types of malware, and from Dropbox. So they are using Dropbox to distribute this stuff to systems. So on May 25th, not too long ago here, we're talking about 3 days, Nobelium campaign escalated significantly using legitimate mass mailing service Constant Contact. Nobelium attempted to target around 3,000 individual accounts across more than 150 organizations, and due to the high volume campaign, automated systems blocked most of the emails, because that's what happens when people start sending a lot of emails when it never really happened before. The spam filters out there kind of say, whoa, wait a minute, like there's a lot of email coming from this source that we've never seen before, so let's treat this as spam right now because maybe something got compromised, and it did. However, the automated systems in the very beginning aren't going to catch this because it's new, right? And some of them may have gotten through to people. So on May 25th, the campaign, there was several iterations. In one example, the email appears to originate from USAID while having an authentic sender email address that matches the standard Constant Contact service. So, everybody's taught to review the email, like who's it from, hover over the links, make sure that, they go to a legitimate place that you're familiar with. And if you deal with Constant Contact a lot, you know that when you hover over a link sent to you from Constant Contact, it sends you back to Constant Contact address, and then it forwards you to the location that the person who crafted the email originally intended you to go. So it's how Constant Contact tracks how you click on links. And what was going on here is that the recipient, the address for Constant Contact was there, that checked out. The reply to address was usaid.gov, that checked out. And this was the email that came in, and it's up on the screen, and this is what it looked like. And they probably looked at other emails that USAID was sending and crafted one that looked very similar to this, right? So the other thing is that when the users hovered over or clicked the email, this right here is Constant Contact's domain. Like most people know that rs6.net is Constant Contact, or they've seen it before, and it's a legitimate link for Constant Contact. You can't see what's behind that link, so when you're clicking on it, you think you're going to Constant Contact, or it's a legitimate link from somebody who did a legitimate email like USAID, when in fact what was behind that link was a redirect to Nobelium controlled infrastructure that used usaid.theyardservice.com, and then a malicious ISO is then delivered to the system, and the ISO is what we talked about earlier with that drive that gets mounted, and within the ISO there are files that get loaded into the computer. They're saved in the user profile, right? So then a shortcut called reports.link, icadclass.pdf, and then a DLL such as document DLL, and that's the Cobalt Strike beacon loader dubbed Native Zone by Microsoft, right? So all of these things get loaded onto your system, and then once they do, the shortcut executes the DLL file. So when you go to try to click on the reports, because this PDF is going to tell you click on the reports folder, you click on that shortcut. That shortcut is not actually a folder. It doesn't take you anywhere. It launches the DLL, which then downloads Cobalt Strike to your computer, and now the hacker has complete control of your system. The successful deployment of the payloads enables Nobelium to achieve persistent access to the compromised systems. Then the successful execution of these malicious payloads could enable Nobelium to conduct action on objectives such as lateral movement, data exfiltration, and delivery of additional malware. So that is how basically ransomware goes down. They can move to different devices on your network. That's the lateral movement part. Data exfiltration, meaning they can start taking information off your systems and storing them on their own servers so that when they do deploy ransomware, they can hold you hostage based on the fact that they stole your data and now they're going to threaten to release it to the public. And that's how they really get people to pay up on these ransomware demands. And then delivery of additional malware, and that could be anything. That could be more persistent access through other backdoors that they're able to figure out within your system. So, you might think that you can get rid of the ransomware, but then they deployed other things on your network that you don't know about, which leads to reinfection or other things down the road. So there's a lot of things going on here. And this type of group with Nobelium, with their history, you can bet that they're probably doing more than just deploying ransomware if they're in your system. Indicators of compromise for the campaign occurring on May 25th are provided in this blog to help security teams identify actor activities. I'm going to run through that right now. Microsoft Defender, 365 Defender, Defender for Office 365 are they're putting together monitoring and delivering coordinated defenses in that software against these threats. So that is very good. After this has been released by Microsoft, most of the major vendors are going to be putting things in place to look at this stuff. So here's how we're going to mitigate this, guys, and here's here's what you need to be doing to make sure that this doesn't happen to you. Now, again, I want to point out very clearly that this is an example of one attack vector that was used through this USAID.gov vector. That doesn't mean that other vectors won't be used and that other vendors that you might deal with or other partners that you might deal with might not. You might get similar emails that are delivered from Constant Contact or other email services. We've identified Constant Contact in this one. They can use other email services to do this same exact thing. They're basically tricking users, so it's more on educating the users on what to do and what not to do around this stuff than anything. But here's how we're going to look at it from a perspective of mitigating it from getting to your system, and then also if you detect it, what we're going to do. So we want to turn on cloud delivered protection in Microsoft Defender antivirus, or the equivalent for your antivirus product, to cover the rapidly evolving attacker tools and techniques. Cloud-based machine learning protections block a huge majority of new and unknown variants. So this is more the AI built into these tools today. If you're not using advanced endpoint protection, you need to look into getting that, because the old antivirus just doesn't do this stuff and it's not good enough. Run endpoint detection in block mode so that Microsoft Defender and Endpoint can block malicious artifacts even when your non-Microsoft antivirus doesn't detect the threat, or when Microsoft Defender antivirus is running in passive mode. EDR in block mode works behind the scenes to remediate malicious artifacts that are detected post-breach. Enable network protection to prevent applications or users from accessing malicious domains and other malicious content on the internet. This is known as content filtering, right? They say network protection. This is content filtering. Most people hate this stuff because it blocks them from going to websites. But this stuff's important. It needs to be implemented and managed well so you can still do business but still be protected from things like this. Enable investigation and remediation in full automated mode and allow Microsoft Defender for Endpoint to take immediate action on alerts to resolve breaches, significantly reducing alert volume. So basically, these tools nowadays can scan a system and tell you, hey, this setting is not really a great setting to have turned on, because if it is turned on, a hacker can take control of your system, and you might not need that to be on all the time, or you might not need it at all depending on how you use your computer. So these remediations around vulnerabilities on systems are very important to do. Microsoft Defender makes that easy, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint specifically. But these are things that people are going to have to start doing if they want to protect themselves from these hackers who can get into your network and then move laterally. These types of actions making sure that your vulnerabilities are cut down on your endpoints, prevent lateral movement or prevent them from moving laterally on your network very easily, right? Because when we don't do this stuff, you make it easy for them. You want to make it hard for them, okay? So use device discovery to increase your visibility into your network by finding unmanaged devices on your network and onboarding them into the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, right? So that's basically saying make sure you have antivirus on all your systems. Enable multi-factor authentication to mitigate compromised credentials. Microsoft strongly encourages all customers to download and use passwordless solutions like Microsoft Authenticator to secure your accounts. Any multi-factor authentication platform is good. You need to use one. We've promoted that on this channel a lot. And the other piece of this is when they get into your system and they can get the Cobalt Strike on there, they're going to be stealing passwords. And that's why you want to have multi-factor involved, because if you don't have multi-factor turned on and they do get your passwords, they're going to be logging into things left and right, and you're going to be completely unaware of it and probably causing more damage to your environment. And had you had multi-factor turned on, you'd be okay. So for Office 365 users, see multi-factor authentication support. Yes, if you have Office 365 email, you should have multi-factor turned on. For consumer and personal email accounts, see how to use two-step verification. That's for any kind of consumer account that you might still have for email, things like that, Gmail, Ymail. Make sure you have two-factor turned on all of those. Turn on the following attack surface reduction rule to block or audit activities associated with this threat. It says block all Office applications from creating a child process. That needs to be turned on. And that's a rule that your IT person or your IT administrator can help you get turned on. I will link this blog post into the description so you can check this out yourself if you want to try to attempt to do this yourself. But some of these things are really things that should be handled by your IT team or your IT administrators. We wouldn't recommend users who aren't trained to do these types of things. So that's why it's important to work with an IT professional. But really, if you want to go about it on your own, you can click on the links within this blog and attempt to try to get it done yourself. I'd recommend at least trying to do it yourself if you don't have an IT person to work with. So indicators of compromise. The attack is currently active. We're only talking about 2 or 3 days old. So here's what we're seeing right now. The email address or the spoofed email account that it's coming from is ashainfo@usaid.gov. And then we also have mhillary@usaid.gov. Then we have some malicious ISO files. These are the ISO files that are being used to mount. This is the hash. This is known as a hash. All things that are installed have these identifiers on them, and this is the what the antivirus would look for to see if this was loaded or downloaded onto your system. They have 3 of them listed here. And then they have this malicious link. They have the Cobalt Strike beacon malware, 2 different hashes for that. USAIDYardService.com is one of the domains where the ISO is distributed from. World Home Outlet, the Yard Service, the Yard Service, the Yard Service again. We have an IP address. We have another IP address, and then we have the Yard Service. And these are all the places where they are distributing all this stuff from. This stuff can change very quickly. They can change where they're delivering this stuff from very quickly. But if you have these indicators on your system now, or you have emails that show indicators that you've clicked or you've received emails with links to these places, you should be able to scan your email logs on your email server or on your Office 365 to see if any of this stuff has come through, and you can see what users received emails that contain these links or IP addresses. That's why you want to use this information. We're not using this information to look for things that could come in the future. or looking at this information to see what's already come in the past, chances are, now that Microsoft has blown the cover on this, that they are already changing their tactics and changing their websites and changing their IP addresses. Microsoft for detection, Microsoft Defender antivirus detects threat components as the following malware, and you can see it here. This native zone signature that they put in the endpoint detection, and then we also have alerts for the following security center can indicate threat activity on your network for any malicious ISO used by Nobelium, any Cobalt Strike beacon used by Nobelium, or Cobalt Strike network infrastructure used by Nobelium. So now the EDR within your antivirus product can detect these things because now it's been shared and it's known. Not to say that this stuff won't change, but you can see that Microsoft is actively monitoring what this group is doing. The following alerts might also indicate threat activity associated with this threat. These threats, however, can be triggered by unrelated threat activity and are not monitored in the status cards provided with this report. An uncommon file was created and added to the startup folder. A linked file with unusual characteristics was opened. And the reason that they're treating it that way, which basically means that this could happen normally on the system or it could happen for some other reason. So they're not treating it the way that they're treating these three things is basically what this says. So be aware of these things, but it may not necessarily mean that you have anything, especially if these three things are not present. And then we go into advanced hunting with Microsoft 365 Defender. And then this is a sample query, and this is kind of getting a little bit technical, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. But if you go to advanced hunting page in the query tab and see the calendar drop-down menu and update your query to hunt for the last 30 days. Now this is for Microsoft 365 Defender. And then it'll run through a query that looks for the recent email to the organization that originates from Constant Contact, original sending infrastructure. It's looking for all the things that we covered above for how this attack actually goes down. Azure Sentinel customers can find a Sentinel query in a GitHub repository. And these are all queries you can run to determine if you have had these emails or had this compromise happen to you. They've also noticed some MIBR attack techniques. This threat makes use of attacker techniques documented in the MIBR attack framework. And we're talking about spear phishing via service and spear phishing via link, right? Spear phishing via service means that a legitimate mass mailing service, Constant Contact, was used to send emails, which elevates trust for end users, which will increase the success of somebody clicking on something. And then we jump down into execution, and they deploy a container, the ISO, which we mentioned, and then they load Cobalt Strike. Once Cobalt Strike is loaded, then they have command and control. So that's it, folks. I just wanted to take you through this to show you that this stuff is never ending, and cybersecurity is here to stay. It's real. This is why you need to have a team that is protecting you from this stuff from the beginning, because a lot of these things that we're reading about, although that they're getting trickier with how they're doing things, if you're monitoring your systems, if you're making sure that things are protected, you don't have tons of vulnerabilities on your network, you have people who are going in and checking this stuff to make sure that a hacker, once he gets in, can't just take complete control of your system, and you're making it more difficult even when one of your employees clicks on one of these links and does something, right? Do you have the capability to isolate it to just that one person or that one event, or when they do click on this stuff, is it going to spread through your entire network and infect your whole entire company and bring your business down to the ground? So that's what we're talking about here. That's the importance of doing it, of this stuff. Don't ride around without a seatbelt. It's time to buckle your seatbelt. That's the analogy I like to use. people didn't drive around with seatbelts, in the 70s and 60s and 50s. And then we got the data in. It says, hey, it's a lot smarter if you drive around with your seatbelt on. And now most people that I get in cars with put their seatbelts on. Just that's what you do, right? So this is how we need to get with this cybersecurity stuff. And I know it's going to be expensive, and I know a lot of business owners out there are like, well, I don't have the money for this. You need to find the money for this, because they will get you. They will target your company. They will do things like this that are what seem to be very sophisticated. Yeah, they are, but they're very preventable at the same time. So that's what I'm going to leave you with, folks. Remember to like the video, share us out, and we'll see you soon. Take care.